animals, Jim. There is an historic opportunity here.
Don't believe them. Don't trust them.
They're dying.
Let them die.
This was the moment. The moment that changed the universe of Star Trek and our understanding of the heroes within that universe forever. One of the most surprising facts about Star Trek VI, Undiscovered Country, is that very few people realize how deeply divided the executives and the cast were on the movie while it was in production.
Mr. Roddenberry really believed in the perfectibility of man. A film in which the crew of the Enterprise has all kinds of prejudice, racial prejudice vis-a-vis the Klingons, and that was all deeply offensive to him because he thought there isn't going to be that. In fact, so he always had problems with writers who were trying to write conflict.
Don't get me wrong, Trek had been no stranger to controversy and exploring themes of racism, betrayal, and more in the past.
Well, here's one thing you can be sure of, mister. Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There's no room for it on the bridge. Do I make myself clear?
You do, sir.
However, the heroes of Starfleet had largely risen above these lower emotions. Racism would occur to those not a part of the Sterling organization, and rarely, if at all, would it be the human that was succumbing to it. At least according to what the creators wanted us to think. What was written in the natural consequences of that writing is somewhat different. The stories of the original Trek television series had generally always been lighthearted and upbeat, more than not. The adventures saw the heroes riding off into the sunset at the end, all the better for their experiences and staying true to the image of a noble cowboy. However, a lot of that would change in 1991 and the release of Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. Arguably, we did see tremors of this starting in 1989, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. With the extreme failure of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and faltering numbers of The Next Generation in Season 1 and Season 2, things had to be shaken up. Nicholas Meyer would be tapped as director for the new movie, and ultimately he decided to take the franchise in effectively a whole new direction. He would open up our well-known heroes to a facet of humanity that had not been explored. In fact, according to Gene Roddenberry, the avarices that our beloved captain and crew will ultimately experience were supposedly exterminated on Earth and basically an unknown concept to humanity by the time they were to be experienced. In effect, humanity had risen above anything that we would today consider to be a negative trait. Well, most of us would consider it to be negative traits anyway. To be precise here, in the Star Trek universe, largely before the Undiscovered Country, humanity wasn't racist. They had no xenophobic inclinations. Our species in this iteration had risen above our baser natures, and we were now something new and wholly different. Problem with that is, well, the concept wasn't proving to be very interesting to modern audiences of the time. The Final Frontier had completely failed as a movie, and as previously mentioned, The Next Generation wasn't faring much better. And it would have gotten worse if not for changes in Season 3. Now again, patience, I'll touch on that later. Arguably, by trying to make humanity perfect, Gene Roddenberry had stripped it of something. Mainly, it was stripped of what it's meant to be human. In my opinion, Gene missed the forest for the trees in his examination of the human condition and how we can improve. Honestly, humanity is defined by its baser natures. That includes the basic desire to love and care for others, as well as the basic failings of greed and hatred. The torrent of emotions and what we want within our species really forms how we are as a social animal. It literally creates the cultures that are around us. To remove this very critical aspect of humanity completely changes what it is to be human. And then it becomes unrelatable because we aren't that. That's not to say that we shouldn't strive to obliterate these things from society, however. Indeed, our culture would be better without racism in any form. However, if you want to show a science fiction utopia, you have to show how the heroes deal with these instincts. We haven't shaken them off yet, so if they have, how do they go about doing it? This allows us to relate to the heroes, to see how they change, and then once we've seen them change, perhaps we can too. And I sincerely believe that in Star Trek: Undiscovered Country, this is done.
They all look alike. What about that smell? You know only top-of-the-line models can even talk. And
When analyzing the characters of this movie, we see them fundamentally different than we've seen before. Kirk, who has lost more than any parent should, has allowed his hatred for the actions of one Klingon to paint his entire opinion of them all. It even goes further than that. Constant war with the Klingons has sparked racism within Starfleet's captains and the Admiralty as well. Starfleet, the pinnacle of goodness and wondrous affairs, has, without even realizing it, started to foster and push a cancer within their very organization. The officers within Starfleet went from responding to the actions and judging each incident individually to placing it on all of the people. The beauty, and perhaps genius, of the film is that we see the cancer of racism isn't the entirety of the organization. Not even the majority of people are racist, just a selected few. Now again, this has been seen in the original series in at least one episode. But most of the series tells us that this isn't humanity, and we never see our heroes have this specific avarice. However, now, Kirk identifies this weakness within himself and ultimately overcomes it. The crew of the Enterprise identify it within others, and they stamp it out as well. When it is realized that racism and prejudice exists by the majority, it is wholly rejected. It's not just ignored or given a one-off reprimand, it's taken on entirely, which is something that we can all relate to. This not only made the universe much larger and expansive, but it allows the audience to relate to the heroes in a way that they couldn't before and shows them that we don't have to succumb to our species' weaker emotions. Now that our heroes were allowed to be, well, human, they wrestle with what that means and become better for it. As I've stated before, that's not to say these concepts weren't already being partially explored. Gene's fall from power in The Next Generation allowed Measure of a Man and The Drumhead to premiere before this movie ever did. These two episodes are heralded by most Trek fans to be absolutely fantastic representations of Trek. So, like I alluded to before, we were already seeing these tremors happen. These episodes started what the movie would finalize. And what the movie finalized was, well, heroes in the Trek universe are now allowed to be more flawed. Without this movie, and Nicholas Meyer, we likely wouldn't have seen Deep Space Nine in the form that we see it now, nor would we have been allowed to explore themes in Voyager and Enterprise. But this wasn't only a fundamental change to the universe that would be embraced in DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and later seasons of TNG, but financially it also helped save the dying movie franchise for Trek. As I've discussed in a previous essay, The Final Frontier nearly destroyed the movies. We might not have seen another one come out for a very long time. Unfortunately, the egotistical romp that glorified Kirk gave very little of what audiences wanted. So when Meyer took on Undiscovered Country, he returned it to a form that gave an experience people really did enjoy. It felt like cowboys in space again. This movie would beat the numbers of Star Trek V with less budget and come to be the third highest grossing movie of the time and ninth overall of the Trek series to date. You'll have to go back to my other essay to really discuss the financial straits that Trek was in, but needless to say, this turned everything around. But all that said, the legacy of Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country isn't it saving the movie franchise, nor will it be the box office success. It'll be the embracing of a fact, and that fact is, to be human, even a perfect human, you have to at least be tempted by humanity's avarices. Humanity in the Trek universe was finally allowed to be bigoted and racist, and by watching how they reject that, we've become better in the real world. So, as I've alluded to, in a way, racism changed the Star Trek universe for the better.